Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are specifically going to talk. This is an introduction of the Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen playlist. So I wanted to. So in the link below, you'll find a link for a J. Scott Garibay Dungeons and Dragons Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen playlist. And so, what is that? I want to talk about that a little bit. So one, I've completed my coverage of Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. So this is an incredibly important, incredibly impacting D&D canon hardback. My coverage of it took 3 months, 43 videos, and 5.5 hours of me talking about Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. So what is in there, right? It's a good question. So it is, I'm not sure this has really been done before, right? So so how are D&D canon hardbacks really covered in on the market of D&D commentary, right? By far the biggest is books will be, gone over with a fine-tooth comb on what is the best build, right? And so I have zero interest in this. It is the most ridiculous coverage, in my opinion, because it's essentially like telling someone how to ride a roller coaster, right? No one needs your advice on. Oh, actually, I was gonna say no one needs your advice on how to do, how to pick the best subclass and how to pick, what are the best items to get to do the most damage, right? And actually, what's really sad is there are people who need your advice on what subclass to choose and what magic item is the best and what spells are the best. You know who those people are? The absolute bog awful worst players, right? So basically, when you do this kind of coverage, you are feeding the wolf, right? You are feeding the player at the table who thinks the least and is going to bring the strongest mechanical build to the table because of copy energy, right? It is the worst problem in the world, copy energy, right? So basically, if you do the least and just go watch Dungeon Dudes talk about what's the best subclass, right, then you can bring the strongest build to the table, right, and do the most damage and literally be the worst player, right? The player who's least focused on role-playing. And so this coverage, I'm not just not interested in doing it, I'm actively opposed to doing it, right? So my coverage was more like, okay, let's talk about Dragonlance and Shadow of the Dragon Queen. And I talked about F. Wesley Snyder, the creator, right? What was he trying to accomplish with the book, right? Also, I talked about what was this book about, right? There's the plain narrative. Oh, this is a story of of the Red Dragon Army trying to take over Solamnia. What's the meta-narrative? In my humble opinion, the meta-narrative, right, is actually F. Wesley Snyder very openly and actively discussing the Ukraine-Russian war, right? I think the analogy is absolutely there. And you're like, no, Scott, I don't think that's there. Did you watch Banshees of Inisherin? Did you think that was a story about 2 Irish sheep farmers? Or is it an analogy for the Irish Civil War? There you go, right? So I talked about Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen in context to the time it was being created, the creator who created it, right? And also the aspects of the hotel renovation. So Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen is not a normal Dungeons & Dragons book. It is a re-permissioning of Dragonlance. Now, would you like re-permissioning? Yes, it's a re-permissioning of Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, right? And so what I mean by that is you are not and people are going to hate this. You don't have permission to play every single setting in Dungeons & Dragons right now under modern Dungeons & Dragons, right? You can waltz over under crusty D&D 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E. You can run whatever you want, but under modern Dungeons & Dragons, there is a permissioning that's being done, and they're like, hey, you know what? Oriental Adventures, not a great title. Maybe we really weren't as sensitive as we could have been to Asian people when we created that. That's currently not permissioned within Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, right? But Dragonlance is not only permissioned, But some of the problems that weren't originally there, right? Some of the prejudice that Hickman has been showing recently, some of the stubbornness that Weiss has been, and that's the other thing. What do you have to scrub off? Not just prejudice, but stubbornness, right? Narrative stubbornness, right? From Weiss, right? So what needs to get scrubbed off? Where's the rust spots on a D&D setting? There was discussion of that within my coverage, right? And then also I did, like, it was an exploration of me reading through the book and saying, oh my goodness, I noticed this delightful thing, or I noticed, this is an area where I think the narrative could have been stronger, right? So basically, I think any engaged player, right, would enjoy hearing this, and any engaged dungeon master would enjoy hearing this commentary. I will also say this is my first explorative coverage of a D&D canon hardback, and this is my first time going through chapter by chapter and looking at it from the context of the person who created it, the time it was created, how it would be received by engaged dungeon masters, how it would be received by engaged players. And honestly, I don't think there's an equivalent to this anywhere on the internet for any other D&D canon hardback. I don't think there really is coverage like this for any. And frankly, I've built this as kind of like, I actually just completed it, and now I'm considering it as like, okay, I've done this for one book. First of all, should I do this for other books? So one, I'm going to ask you guys, do you think this is is this worth the time for this channel to cover D&D canon hardbacks in this way? First of all, I will tell you right now, it is not what gets the most views, right? But that's okay, right? My channel is not like, I'm really not a slave to views or subscribers, right? And I have the ability to do things that other channels don't, just because I have a different structure, right? And one, monetization means nothing to me, right? Like, which is really freeing. I cannot tell you how freeing that is, right? It's really kind of a big deal that I am freed from that, right? So that's very nice, and I really appreciate your guys' patience with this. And I also want to say thank you to each and every one of you who watched a single one of these videos, right? And so I would love your opinion on if this is a good use of time for the channel. How would what would you suggest I do to make them better? What are some things I could do with this type of coverage that I haven't thought of already? I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on this. So thank you very much for each and every video you watched within this playlist. It now exists as an entire playlist, which is nice because, people, like, I've been doing this 8 years, right? There's going to be a person who comes tomorrow who's never seen my work before, right? And I have playlists where they can just watch through and see all the coverage in one section. And I also want to say thank you to YouTube for making this functionality so easy to use and so powerful. Playlists are very powerful, and I'm very thankful. And I just want to say, thank you to you guys. I feel proud of making this accomplishment. I really appreciate everyone who watched even a single video, within the Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen content. And I'm incredibly thankful. And I also want to just say thank you to YouTube. You always hear it when, some creators got some, quibble with YouTube, but I have a global platform, and I don't pay, like, people are like, I don't make enough money. Frankly, the services I get from YouTube, sometimes I think I should be paying them, right? It's incredibly valuable. I do not take a global platform for granted. They make it incredibly easy for me to share my content on, and every opinion I've ever had on Dungeons & Dragons, right? And I really do not take that for granted. So I want to really take a moment to say thank you to YouTube, and thank you for staying on YouTube. And Twitch can go kick rocks. Every word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.